E1. Political parties play important roles in United States elections and government institutions. Over the past several decades, the influence of political parties in elections has declined while their strength in Congress has increased. A. Describe two important functions of political parties in the election process. Simplify choices for voters. Can find info quickly, choices are reduced, already no party label. Moderate IGs, interest groups. Broad views, IG can be intense advocates, represents IG. Organize election process. Find candidates for various offices, mobilize. Organize government and policy making. Would have individual coalitions without parties, parties have principles based on their platform. Political parties represent groups as well as individuals. These interest groups have special concerns. They may represent the interests of farm workers, urban African Americans, small business operators, particular industries, or teachers, any similar individuals who cooperate to express a specific agenda. B. Describe one important role political parties play within Congress to promote the party's public policy agenda. Set the rules for Congress. Select party/committee leaders. The parties in both houses of Congress gather, or caucus, separately to select party leaders and to arrange for the assignment of members of each chamber's committees. C. Define direct primaries and candidate-centered campaigns and explain how they have weakened the influence of political parties over the political process. Direct primaries. Voters directly elect candidates. Candidate-centered campaigns. May not be aligned with party's vision. Policies of the candidate are at the forefront, focuses on the candidate, their stand on issues and character rather than their party affiliation. D. Define party polarization and explain one major cause of party polarization in Congress. Party polarization equals the presence of increasingly conflicting and divided viewpoints between Democrats and Republican parties. One major cause is changing political campaigns. Parties have used micro-targeting to identify partisans. We have created stereotypes of party identifiers in our heads. E. Explain two major consequences of party polarization on the electorate and governance. Consequences on the governance: lack of moderate members and lower incentives to compromise and cross party lines make it nearly impossible to enact important policy proposals. Consequences on electorate: forcing generally moderate American voters to choose between two clearly divided political parties will lead to less trust in government and lower rates of participation. The answer for essay question 2 is in Chapter 15. E2. Individuals often form groups in order to promote their interests. The Constitution contains several provisions that protect the rights of individuals who try to promote their interests in a representative democracy. A. Describe two provisions in the Bill of Rights that protect people who try to influence politics. First Amendment. Freedom of assembly allows citizens to peacefully organize together. Freedom of petition allows citizens to address the government. B. Explain how each of the following is used by interest groups to exert influence over policy: grassroots mobilization, lobbying the elected branches, litigation, lobbying the courts. Grassroots mobilization: interest groups try to get their members to have more direct influence over policy by, for example, providing text messages/web links for citizens to use to lobby their legislators. Lobbying the elected branches: groups try to work closely with the administration to influence policy decisions at their formulation and later at their implementation stages. They try and provide info about where the public stands on issues. Litigation: direct sponsorship or file amicus curiae briefs to inform justices of the group's policy preferences. C. Describe one specific federal governmental regulation of interest groups. Federal Regulation of Lobbying Act requires anyone hired to lobby any member of Congress to register and file quarterly financial reports. D. Explain. Do not merely list two major theories of the way that interest groups impact governance. Be sure to explain each view and precisely why interest groups end up producing the results described. Pluralist theory: politicians will side with groups of people rather than one person. Disturbance theory: everyone concerned with the same problem will come together. Multiple choice questions section: the following terms, concepts, relationships, etc. will be the basis for the multiple choice question section of the exam. I say basis because a number of questions will require analysis that demonstrates understanding/comprehension, not merely rote memorization. Political parties. Define. Political party: an organized group with shared goals and ideals that join together to run candidates for office and exercise political and electoral power. Explain why the framers have a negative view of political parties. Framers' view: political parties equals bad, suspicious of them because stability. Political parties were created to overthrow a government, organization to create a revolution. 1. Revolutionary and created instability in your government. Majority faction. They are self-interested and selfish and favor their own interest at the expense of the public good in general. Political parties attempt at creating formal organization whose purpose is to oppress or otherwise promote policies that were harmful to the public good. Development of parties loyal opposition. Oppose certain policies but loyal to the government. Differ on ideology and issues but not fundamental beliefs. Major functions of political parties. Simplify choices for voters. X. The party label. Organize the election process, finding candidates for various offices. Organize government and policy making. Don't need nearly as much organization and deal making in order to get things done. Allows them to pursue their party's agenda. Represent and moderate interest groups. Parties are coalitions and are forced to be, because unlike interest groups, they need to get elected. Parties are forced to make coalitions with interest groups because interest groups has no members to elect. Critical realignment, periods where a sharp and lasting shift occurs in the popular coalition supporting one or both parties. Happens when the issues that divide two parties change, thus the voters in each party change. In the election where large number of voters change party preference, or new voters identify with one party more. Secular realignment, the gradual rearrangement of party conditions, based more on demographic shifts than on shocks to the political system. Party identification, a citizen's personal affinity for a political party, usually expressed by a tendency to vote for the candidates of that party. Effects of ideology, liberals tend to vote Democrats and conservatives vote Republican. Income, poor vote more Democratic, the well-to-do vote heavily Republican. Sex, women are more likely to support Democratic candidates and men support Republicans. Race, white Cuban Americans, some Asians, majority Vietnamese, tend to vote for Republicans. African American, most Hispanic groups tend to support Democratic candidates. Religion, Catholic, Muslims, and Jewish voters tend to favor the Democratic Party, while Mormons and white Protestants, especially Methodists, Presbyterians, and Episcopalians, align with the Republican Party. Age, middle-aged voters disproportionately favor the Republican Party, young adults vote for the Democratic Party, and the nation's oldest voters tend to favor the Democratic Party and its support for social insurance programs. Party polarization, increasingly conflicting and divided viewpoints between the Democratic and Republican parties. National Convention, a party meeting held in the presidential election year for the purpose of nominating a presidential and vice presidential ticket and adopting a platform. National Committee, the chief executive agency of a political party usually consisting of members chosen by the National Convention to represent geographical areas or constituent elements in the party and having general supervisory powers over the organization of national conventions and the planning of campaigns. National Chairman, the chairman of the National Committee of the political party who usually acts as the head of the party's permanent organization and has general direction of party strategy especially during election campaigns. Party platform, a statement of the general and specific philosophy and policy goals of a political party, usually promulgated at the National Convention. Political machine, a party organization that recruits voter loyalty with tangible incentives and is characterized by a high degree of control over member activity. Party nomination, contest to be the party's candidate at the general election. General election, election in which voters decide which candidates will actually fill elective public offices. Primary election, election in which voters decide which of the candidates within a party will represent the party in the general election. Primary. Open, everyone can vote for whoever they want. Closed, only registered party members can vote for their affiliated parties. Happy face, this promotes party unity and prevents other parties from intentionally polluting their opposition's polls by voting for their weakest candidates. Semi-closed, party members can vote for their own parties, however unaffiliated independents can vote for whomever. Caucus, deliberation and decision on which delegates get chosen to represent a party, this is an example of indirect democracy. Meeting of party members to deliberate and then decide which candidate to support, for president. Delegates are then chosen who will represent their choices at the convention. Effect of primaries had on the relative power of party leaders. Primary and especially caucus voters are not representative of party members or general electorate. The people who have the most amount of time on their hands and are the most ideological, wealthy old people, the retired who please activists, show up to the meetings, not the ones who want to represent a party. Delegate, a person sent to authorize or represent others. Superdelegate, delegate to the Democratic Party's national convention whose vote at the convention is unpledged to a candidate for the presidential nomination. Free to support any candidate for the presidential nomination, this position is reserved for a party official. Front-loading, the recent tendency of states to hold primaries early in the calendar in order to capitalize on media attention. Intent of front-loading on influence of Iowa caucuses and New Hampshire primaries. Front-loading in these states is hardly surprising, given the added press emphasis on the first contests and the voters' desire to cast their ballots before the competition is decided. Front-loading has important effects on the nomination process. First, a front-loaded schedule generally benefits the front-runner, since opponents have little time to turn the contest around once they fall behind. Second, front-loading gives an advantage to the candidate who wins the invisible primary, that is, the one who can raise the bulk of the money before the nomination season begins. Once primaries and caucuses begin, less opportunity is available to raise money to finance campaign efforts simultaneously in many states, such as Iowa and New Hampshire, which are the two major small states that play a huge role in the nomination process. Third, minor parties. What effect have minor parties had on American politics? They can play a spoiler role, taking enough votes away from one of the two major parties to cost its candidate the election. By winning electoral votes or even enough popular votes to affect the outcome in a key state, they can affect the outcome of an election. It is not common for their candidate to shift the outcome of a presidential election. Winner-take-all versus proportional representation. Winner-take-all candidate who wins the most votes in a state secures all of that state's delegates. Demo. Don't like this BC, they see it as less representative. Repubs prefer this as it enables a candidate to amass a majority of delegates quickly and shortens the primary season. Proportional representation candidates who secure a threshold % of votes are awarded delegates in proportion to the hashtag of POP. Votes 1. Single-member districts versus multi-member districts. Single-member, an electoral district in which voters choose one representative or official. Only one person, such as a congressman, represents the people living in a single-member district. Multi-member electoral districts that send 2 or more members to a legislative chamber. Demo. What effect does the federal gov winner-take-all system, single-member district have on the party system? One party has permanent monopoly on power and the winner is effectively predetermined. High % of wasted votes. Undervoting. Benefits. 1. Enable you to simplify choices. 2. Creates a conditions to allow the majority party to govern more easily. Why? Coalitions must be created multi-member system that is divided on certain issues. Cons. 1. You will be invisible if you are not part of the two major parties. What have been the major effects of the reforms of the presidential nominating process? Presidential coattails. Net effect of reforms: democratized and weakened political parties, but power then flows to interest groups and local officials. Candidate-centered. Narrower viewpoints/confrontational style. Political participation. What are the various ways in which suffrage requirements have changed since 1789? 15th Amendment 1869 gave right for all to vote no matter race, color, or previous condition of servitude, not including women of any color or race. 19th Amendment 1920 gave women the right to vote, unified suffrage laws across the U.S. 26th Amendment 1971, anyone over the age of 18 can vote. Property. Net result: universal adult suffrage, 18+. How do age, race, education, and sex correlate with rates of voter turnout? Women are slightly more likely to show up to vote. The more educated, the more likely to show up to vote. There is no significant difference between white and blacks, more likely than Hispanics and Asians. The older, the more likely to vote. Forms of political participation other than voting. Gather poll info/gather political info. Contact government officials. Rally/protests. Campaigning, becoming involved, X, persuading people to vote/donate. Community action, form groups within the community. Civil disobedience, breaking the law and authority to protest what you think is unjust, can lead to penalties. Clicktivism. Registration, required in U.S. to vote in elections. Voter ID requirements, many states require a photo ID. Literacy test, Southern state legislatures employed literacy tests as part of the voter registration process starting in the late 19th century. Literacy tests, along with poll taxes and extra legal intimidation, were used to deny suffrage to African Americans. Poll tax, a tax levied in many southern states and localities that had to be paid before an eligible voter could cast a ballot. Causes of decline in voter turnout. Content. Discontent and no good options. Less social capital, increasing in individualism. Political system is not explained to the people. Lack desire and ability to mobilize collectively. Lack of familiarity. Campaigns and elections. Major differences between a primary and a general election campaign. http://study.com/academy/lesson/primary-election-versus-general-election-definition-differences.html. Def. Primary elections narrow the field of candidates before general elections for office. X. 2016 Democratic primary, Hillary Clinton vs. Bernie Sanders. X. 2016 presidential general election, Hillary Clinton vs. Donald Trump. Primary campaigns. Smaller electorate. Political activists are more important. Primary voters are more ideologically extreme. Congressional primary elections are usually more competitive than congressional general because of incumbency and gerrymandering. General election campaigns. Based on electoral college. Gerrymandering, manipulate the boundaries of an electoral constituency, so as to favor one party or class. Effect of television advertising on general election versus primaries. Paid ads are more effective in primaries, negative ads negative ads are more effective. PAC, what is it and what does it do? Political Action Committee, set up to directly influence elections, limited on donations, union/corp/ must get donations voluntarily. PACs directly donate money to candidates where they spend that money to get re-elected, directly involved to get candidates in office. Officially recognized fundraising organizations that represent interest groups and are allowed by federal law to make contributions directly to candidates' campaigns. 527/501, c. Organizations. Two different forms of advocacy groups, groups that try to influence public opinions or policy. 527 Group, a tax-exempt group to raise money for political activities on a federal, state, or local level. Can receive unlimited funding from individuals, corporations, or labor unions, but must register with IRS and must disclose contributions and expenditures. 501, c. Groups, nonprofit, tax-exempt groups that can engage in varying levels of political activities depending on the type of group, C1 through C29. X. 501, c. 5 Labor and agricultural organizations. Super PAC. No limits on donations. Can't be a candidate and run a super PAC, must hire someone else to run it. No donations to candidates. Can be business partner. Can support and run ads in favor of a candidate. Can keep candidates' original staff. Asterisk independent expenditures only. Union/corp, unlimited donations and spending. Impact, weakens parties and strengthens individual candidates and interest groups. Major principles of campaign finance reform. Principles, disclosure, limits on donations and spending. At a minimum people would know where candidates are getting from so you can judge them, shows what groups the candidate supports. Self-financing, no limits on spending. You can spend as much money as you want on campaigns as long as it's your money, rule only applies to donations. Individuals, limits on donations to candidates. Public funding for presidential campaigns only in exchange for spending limits. Candidates can, 1. Accept public funding and, 2. People no longer accept public funding after Obama declined to accept public funding. Soft money, unlimited funds solicited from individuals, corporations, and unions that are spent on party activities, registration and voting drives, etc., rather than on the behalf of a specific candidate. Independent expenditures, spending by political action committees on political matters that is done directly and not by giving money to candidates or a party. What were the major changes made to campaign finance as a result of the bipartisan campaign? Tillman Act. Corrupt Practices Act. Hatch Act. Taft-Hartley Act. Federal Election Commission, FEC. Finance Reform Act of 2002, aka McCain-Feingold Act. Creation of a new set of campaign finance regulations known as the Bipartisan Reform Campaign Act, BCRA, where political advertising and funding are regulated. What effects did Citizens United v. FEC have on the rules and practices of campaign finance? Banned soft money to party. Banned electioneering ads 30/60 days before election funded by corp/unions. However, the Supreme Court lifted the ban on the ads because they ruled that laws preventing corporations and unions from using general treasury funds for independent electioneering communications violate the First Amendment's guarantee of freedom of speech. How large of a role does money play in presidential and congressional elections? Primary elections for Pres and Congress? Yes. General elections for Congress? Yes. General elections for President? No. Money and influence on congressional votes? No. The most important factors in deciding elections. Party identification, most important factor. Candidate appeal, personality and character. Issues, especially security and the economy. Campaign, least important. Stimulate voter interest. Allows voters to judge character/principles. See performance under pressure. Effect of gender gap on partisan voting. Men and women prefer different policies because of bargaining power. Since M/W can increase power differently, they will vote differently. X. Working men tend to vote on policies that will minimize taxes on earnings and preserve job security, while working women will vote for policies that increase outside options for women, subsidized childcare, education policies, who pays for development of skills. Increased government spending equals increased outside options for women. Specific skilled economies equals less outside options for women. Women will vote more like men because there aren't other options for them. Also, women who hold traditional roles will vote more like men. General skilled economies equals women's outside options are greater, so the gender gap is also larger. Straight party ticket voting, across the board votes for candidates in a party, one party only. Split ticket voting, votes for candidates from different parties, multiple parties. Prospective voting, voting for a candidate because one favors his or her ideas for addressing issues after the election, forward-looking. Retrospective voting, voters judge how well the party in power has governed and decide if they want to retain them. Effects of campaigns on elections. Stimulate voter interest. Allow voters to judge character. See performance under pressure. How effective are positive versus negative campaign ads and why? Negative positive because bad/unusual things happening attracts more interest. How significant are elections in altering public policy? Elections have a significant effect on public policy, but in most cases the Constitution, by its very structure, moderates the rate of change. It's important to moderate change. B/C radical change interrupts people's planning and expectations equals causes conflict. Interest groups. Define interest group. How does it differ from political parties? A group of people sharing a common intent/goal who form a formal organization to influence public policy. Political parties' main goal is to get members elected in office under a party label, whereas interest groups simply want to influence public policy. Actual v. Potential interest group. Potential, all the people who might be interest group members because they share common views, larger than the actual interest group. Actual, consists of people from the potential group who have officially joined. Civic virtue. The morality or a standard of righteous behavior in relationship to a citizen's involvement in society. Examples of exhibiting civic virtue: voting, volunteering, organizing a book group, attending a PTA meeting, etc. Social capital, the networks of relationships among people who live and work in a particular society, enabling that society to function effectively. Why are interest groups so common in the U.S.? Large republic equals many different interests. Constitutional structure provides many access points to government at all levels. -1 St. Amendment, free speech/press and freedom to petition government. Political parties are also weak without interest groups. Policy entrepreneur. Business entrepreneur who seeks to gain profit through subsidies, protectionism, government contracts, or other such favorable arrangements with government, through political influence, also known as corporate welfare. * Individuals who exploit opportunities to influence policy outcomes to increase their self-interests. What types of interest groups are there? What distinguishes each type? Public interest groups, an organization that seeks a collective good that will not selectively and materially benefit group members. Economic interest groups, primary purpose is to promote the financial interests of its members. Governmental units, state and local govs lobby for money to cover a vast array of state and local programs. PACs. Civil rights, single issues, religious, ideological interest groups. Functions of interest groups. Influence public policy process. Provide info to government and voters. Set the agenda. Monitor government. Campaigns and elections. Free rider problem: ride-off efforts of other people, don't want to pay/join the group, still benefit even though they aren't doing anything to contribute. 3 types of incentives used to get people to join interest groups. Social, people with like mind to join. Material, discounts and opportunities offer. Moral, persuasion to join/value system. Activities interest groups use to advance their aims. Lobbying access information, persuasion, pressure. The most important thing they have is info. Litigate, go to law, be a party to a lawsuit, file a lawsuit. Grassroots lobbying, influencing government decision makers though indirect pressure, usually in the form of letters, emails, phone calls, from large numbers of constituents. Electioneering influence parties and candidates, direct group involvement in electoral process. Direct pressure. The most important resource that lobbyists have at their disposal to persuade public officials. Information. Patron, a person who gives financial or other support to a person, organization, cause, or activity. Iron triangle, term used to describe the policy-making relationship among the subcommittees, or state legislatures, the agency that delivers the program, and interest groups. Not indestructible, they face the challenge of issue networks, which is an alliance of various interest groups and individuals who unite in order to promote a single issue in government policy. X. The nuclear power iron triangle was destroyed due to the environmental issue networks. What are the various views of the impact of interest groups on policy making? Pluralism equals good. Bargaining among interest groups is essence of politics. Fittest to survive that there is an unavoidable tainting of self-interest. I'm guessing it's because interest groups makes up the vast majority of parties, so their ideas/interests usually gets addressed, affecting policy making, whereas, if you're not from any kind of groups, your voice will never be heard. Some view it as factions, that the elite and rich benefit from it and that it sometimes ends up in gridlock where things don't get done because of opposing interests and selfish interests. Media. Major functions of media. Watchdog over government. Press must be free to report the news, therefore limited gov regulations. To clarify electoral choices. What do parties stand for? What do we know about candidates? Personal character. Knowledge, experience and position of issues. 3. Provide policy information. Are current policies working? Cons and pros of particular policies. What are the alternatives? 4. Political socialization. Impact of media hard to measure. Media's role in political socialization. What is the primary source of news information for most people? Younger generation, social media, middle-aged, TV, elderly, TV and newspapers. How does the way that the media are structured affect news coverage? Simple, easily have the attention of viewers. Avoid radicalism. Profit motive. Appeal to audience. Attracts advertisers. How have newer technologies such as cable and the internet affected news coverage? TV is the most popular form of news source, 57%. Online 38%. Radio 25%. Print paper 20%. Which media are regulated by government and by which agency? Government can regulate electronic media such as TV and radio because the airwaves used by the electronic media are considered public property and those airwaves are in limited supply. Government regulations of electronic media apply in 2 major areas, ownership and content. Regulated by the Federal Communications Commission, FCC. Equal time rule. The rule that requires broadcast stations to sell airtime equally to all candidates in a political campaign if they choose to sell it to any only applies to broadcast media. Fairness doctrine. What media forms have arisen since its elimination? Holders of broadcast licenses had to discuss important issues to the public and discuss multiple perspectives of the issue, including contrasting viewpoints on controversial issues. What are the various ways in which the media may be biased? Does it necessarily have an effect? The media can put out biased info based on their views and ideologies, like news stations, that is stretched from the actual truth. X. Clinton emails, Trump. Reporters are mostly liberal. Corporate, owners and advertisers usually conservative. It does not necessarily have an effect because people seek out news and information that meets their ideologies already and dismiss information that disagrees with their views. Selective attention, but critics say that this increases polarization. Explicit bias, good. Polarizing, bad. Explain, agenda setting, framing. Agenda setting, the process of forming the lists of issues to be addressed by government. Significant media attention to an issue often increases the salience of that issue with average citizens. These citizens then pressure the government to take action. Framing, the process by which news organization defines a political issue and consequently affects opinion about the issue. Example, The KKK is framed as a civil rights story about a group's right to express their ideas versus a law and order issue. Framing can be very manipulative, and the example from class about immigration and the single mother. What's the most important effect that the media have on politics? They have a greater effect on issues far removed from the lives and experience of readers and viewers, such as foreign countries, because issues such as rising food or gas prices, which are more personal, are already well-formed ideas. In what ways do the media influence political campaigns/elections? Internet allows cheap direct appeals for donations and direct targeting of specific voters on specific issues.